Hi everyone! Welcome to our Farm to School video series by Common Roots. Today, we're talking about the bacterial life that lives in the soil, in plants, in our foods, and in our bodies. Last month, we focused on regenerative agriculture, which is a type of farming that helps bacteria thrive in our soils. It keeps our soil really good and rich to grow food. This episode, we're focusing on the bacteria that live inside our bodies. The ones who live in there are really important for our digestion. They help us break down food, which keeps us energized and happy. We're starting at the very beginning today, in the forest, where beneath your feet, there are communities of bacteria thriving. Let's go.
Kaylee, thanks for meeting up with me out in the forest today. That was a nice walk.
Yeah, thank you. It was beautiful.
I love walking in the forest in winter. You know, the whole hush across the landscape is lovely, yet in the forest there's so much activity to discover. So there are tracks in the snow, there's this rustling up in the treetops. Sometimes there's a slippery, mushy part where the snow's melted and those leaves have all collected. And then even these tiny little snow fleas you can discover this time of year.
Yeah.
It's always been a favorite place of mine. Did I ever tell you about when I was younger I wanted to grow up and be a forest ranger?
No, you didn't tell me that. That sounds like a great job.
I did, but then I decided to be a teacher instead. And so now I teach in the forest, and I teach on farms and in gardens and fields and anywhere out on the land with kids. I just love it. But I wanted to ask you, I've been hearing a lot of this forest ranger talk lately about all these new discoveries they made. Have you heard about that yet?
I don't think so.
Have you heard about it? It's called the soil microbiome. And first of all, it's invisible. It's ancient, thousands of years old. Yes, it's still very active in many places today. And the way it works is there are bacteria and fungi. Sounds like fun guys, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they are. So what they do is they inhabit the forest below the roots of the trees, down where the worms are, and then even deeper down into the depths of the forest floor. And these bacteria and fungi have an amazing capacity to be a harmonious, cooperative community. It's incredible.
That is.
Now, I know we hear so much today about the bad bacteria. You know, we wash your hands and sneeze into your sleeve and, you know, sanitize this and that. But actually, these bacteria are beneficial.
There's a really similar community of bacteria that live right in your body. In your gut, there are a lot of bacteria that are a really important part of your digestion. And they rely a lot on us to give them what they need to be healthy. So they really require a lot of food, just like we do. They need their energy to survive and thrive. And it matters a lot what we put into our body to feed them. The things that they like best are things that grow in healthy soils, like vegetables and fruits. Those things have a lot of fiber, and that fiber feeds our gut bacteria. It's really an important part of our bodies, and it keeps us happy and healthy when our guts are happy and healthy. Another really cool food that is important for our gut bacteria is fermented foods. Fermented foods actually have living bacteria that exist within the food, and we eat them, and they get added to that community.
Well, what kind of foods are fermented foods?
That's a really good question, Joanne. Do you know of any fermented foods that you eat in your day-to-day lives? Some of the foods that I eat the most that are fermented are yogurt, kimchi, sourdough bread, coffee, chocolate. All of those foods rely on a fermentation process before we eat them. And that fermentation process is actually the bacteria starting to develop their communities in the food before you even get there. A lot of the times it's wild bacteria that come out of the air. And then when they have the things they need, like sugar, to eat and grow, that's a fermentation process, is when the bacteria are actually living in there and eating, metabolizing, and producing waste. And their waste is actually the part that's good for us. It's also the part that makes it taste so good, or soured. It depends on what you're eating. But how do we know when our gut bacteria are happy and healthy? Well, on a day-to-day basis, you know that you're doing well if you have a lot of energy and you can run around. You can tell if your bacteria need something from you or they're not feeling so good if you have a number of symptoms. Some of those symptoms are the feeling of bloating, which is sort of like holding a lot of air in your belly in an uncomfortable way. You can feel cramping, which is just pains in your lower stomach. You can feel really tired walking around your day like sort of in a dream, not having enough energy to go run around and play like you normally would. It's important to eat a lot of good, healthy foods because it helps your memory. So if you're starting to feel any of those symptoms, then it's probably a pretty good sign that your bacteria are asking you for some food, for some love. So you can give them those foods that we talked about. Anything with fiber, fresh fruits and vegetables especially, that were grown in healthy soils. And then including fermented foods, which have those living bacteria in the food themselves that can be added to your body.
Let me see if I got the story straight. So, we have microbiomes in the soil on some of the foods we eat, especially the fermented ones. And those have special bacteria on them. So if we eat the special bacteria foods, they're kind of like chefs. And they feed the rest of the food we've chewed and add this special ingredients, and they make like the perfect meal for our gut bacteria to eat. Wow.
Yeah.
That's an endless cycle of goodness, Kaylee. It makes me want to make a sourdough sandwich with sauerkraut and melted Swiss cheese, side of pickles that are fermented, and wash it down with a little kombucha.
That sounds great. So when we're eating foods like that throughout the day, we're kept happy and healthy because our gut microbiome, that community, is happy and healthy. The two rely on each other a lot. It's a really interesting connection from soil to plants to our bodies because bacteria is the oldest life form on this whole earth. It was the first thing to ever develop. And now it exists in all of those different places. Every living being has a microbiome that helps them survive and keeps them healthy.
So I know that our ancestors were very familiar with fermented foods. A lot of these foods have been around for so long. So these wise traditions have been in cultures all across the world. That makes me think of the Cherokee tribe here in the United States. They packed their corn in corn husks and fermented it. And actually, that made it easier to digest, and it was good food to take on long trail excursions. Then we've got the kimchi you mentioned from Korea. We've got miso from Japan, sour cream and yogurt from all these dairy cultures all around the world. We've got pita bread from the Middle East. I mean, kraut from Germany. We could go on and on and on. But all of these wise cultural food traditions around fermented foods, they're getting noticed. And I'm beginning to see that more people are taking up this culture of fermented foods. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's a good thing for us to know about.
It is. Kaylee, what about making a fermented food right now?
That sounds awesome.
You want to join us? I'm going to invite my friend Micah to come in because he's been making fermented foods with his family since he was a young boy. Come join us. We're ready to get started in a minute. All right, are you ready to do some food scientist experiments with us today? Get in your kitchen because we're just about ready to get started. So, it's going to be magical cooking we're doing today. And you might wonder, how are you going to do magical cooking? Well, you do not need an oven. You do not need your stove. You do not need fire. You don't even need a cooking pan. All you need is a glass jar. Then, what we're going to do is do our magical cooking by using the warm temperature in our room, somewhere between 65 and 70 degrees. And then the last clue is we're going to do something that Kaylee mentioned earlier. We're going to, can you guess? Ferment. That's right. We're going to make sauerkraut. All right, sauerkraut is super soured cabbage. It might taste a little salty, even spicy, maybe even funky. Are you starting to wonder if you really want to be a part of this food science, magical cooking experiment? Well, listen, sailors long ago traveled without any fresh food in their boats, and sauerkraut saved their lives. You know, in the holds they had giant containers, vats of sauerkraut below, enough sauerkraut to equal the weight of 5 cows. Pirates liked it too, and I'm not going to get into that story because you probably know why. But if you're ready, get in the kitchen because Micah and Kaylee are ready to sour some cabbage with you. In this food science experiment, you're going to learn about the bacteria battles between the good and the ugly. Okay, let's get this thing going before something crazy happens here. We're going to use red and green cabbage. Luckily, Farmer Faye grew a lot of cabbage for us, so we're going to surprise her with a sauerkraut gift after we show you how to sour cabbage into kraut. You need a stable area to cut your cabbage. It's good to cut the bottom off and then slice right down the center of the head. You can also try cutting it right down the center and removing the core from 2 separate pieces. After that, we're ready to turn our head of cabbage over and slice it into 1/4-inch slices, or if you are safe using a mandoline, you can slice your cabbage on the mandoline. We're going to use the whole head of green cabbage. Now we're ready to slice up half of a red cabbage. We'll have to stabilize it again on top of the cutting board so it's secure and safe for cutting and using your mandoline. Remember to save the top leaf of your cabbage from each head, both red and green, and set that aside. Again, we'll have to cut the cabbage in half and remove the cores. Now that we're done slicing our cabbage, it's time to peel a carrot. So we're going to leave the outer skin, the peel of our carrot, to use in our fermentation of the cabbage, because like the outer cabbage leaf, the outside of the carrot skin is full of beneficial, health-giving, invisible bacteria. Now that we're done peeling our carrot, we're going to shred an apple and add some sweetness to this soured cabbage ferment recipe. Again, leave the skin on so we can take advantage of all that good bacteria. The sweetness of this apple will add a nice little pick-me-up to this sauerkraut recipe. Okay, now that we have enough apple, our next ingredient is ginger, fresh ginger root. And when we use ginger, we remove the peel with a vegetable peeler, and then we use a tool called a microplane to grate it up into very tiny pieces. Ginger's got a lot of hot, spicy flavor to it. It's really warming in our bellies during these winter months. It's good any time of year, but in the winter, it's especially warming and adds a nice zippy flavor to the sauerkraut. So as you can see here, Kaylee's using a special tool called a microplane, and you have to be really careful keeping your fingers away from that because the grater is super tiny and very easy to catch a little bit of skin in. Mike is finishing up peeling that bit of ginger, and he'll microplane that a little bit later. But you can see Kaylee's very carefully removing that ginger from her microplane surface. All right, now that we have all of our ingredients prepared, it's time to massage or mash your sauerkraut. Actually, it's not kraut yet. We'll be massaging or mashing our cabbage. So Kaylee is going to show you how to massage all of the ingredients in a bowl. We've got our cabbage, both red and green. We've got our carrots, including our peels. We've got our apple, including our outer skin. And we've got our ginger, peeled and grated on the microplane. We still have our leaves, outer leaves of cabbage set aside. And now the last two ingredients. We have sea salt from many parts of the seas where sailors have probably traveled. And Kaylee and Micah are each going to choose a salt to put in their cabbage. We've got Kaylee's sea salt, and we've got the black sea salt in Micah's hands that are from the Hawaiian Islands, where sailors love to vacation in the warm seas. So they've measured out 3 tablespoons already, and they're going to put that entire amount into their cabbage. And the last ingredient, I just couldn't resist a little bit of our local forest microbiome, juniper berries. You just need a few. If you don't have this at home, that's fine. The salt can be your last ingredient. So now we're ready to massage our cabbage, and that's Kaylee's job. She's going to massage all her ingredients and the salt in a bowl. Micah, on the other hand, is going to show you a fancy new tool. He's going to put his cabbage bucket on the ground, and he's going to use something you probably don't have at home, but this is a maple forest kraut masher. All right, we're ready to get started. All of the ingredients need to be mixed into the salt. If you have any fine cuts on your hand, you might want to wear rubber gloves for this part so the salt doesn't get into your chapped winter skin. And the salt is going to open up the cabbage leaves to let all the water run out. This is a good time to listen, because what you hear right now is a lot of squeaky, crunching sound. Now Kaylee's ready to massage all of her ingredients. So they're both going to start working on releasing the water inside the cabbage. It's remarkable how much water there is in there. And the way we notice how much cabbage leaves hold water is by putting salt on it and massaging it into the surface or mashing it into the surface of the cabbage leaves. This is a good time to listen to the sound of the ingredients. Does it sound like squeaky, squawky kind of cabbage being massaged and mashed? We'll know when it's finished, when it turns into a sloshy, slurpy, melting, slushy snow sound. Now that Kaylee and Micah have broken open the cells of the cabbage, as you saw in all that watery brine, it's time for them to get ready to pack their jars. It's important to pack the jars down loosely and then tamp it tightly. If you listen carefully, you can hear the sloshing of the brine as they pack those jars. Actually, you can see the brine oozing out as they pack their jars. Remember, we said that the outside of the cabbage leaves were full of wild, yeasty, good bacteria. That's what's going to keep the ugly bacteria from getting inside our kraut jars. So Kaylee looks almost ready. She's going to mash down her kraut with her wooden spoon to get a lot of those air bubbles out and to compact the cabbage and kraut ingredients as best she can. And Mike is using another wooden tool, anything that you have at home handy that fits inside the opening neck of your jar is just perfect. Remember we talked about magically cooking without an oven, a stove top, a fire, or any cooking pan, just a jar? And do you remember that the level of temperature between 65 and 70 degrees in your house is going to be the magical cooking heat for this recipe? So last, they need to cover their brine and cabbage with those outer yeasty bacteria cabbage leaves. And you can see there's a different color brine in each of their jars. I bet you're wondering why that happened. That's a good question to think about a little bit more. Looks like Mike is ready to put his leaves in too. So they're both making sure that their cabbage is submerged under the brine, and they're using the leaves as a lid to make sure that's happening. And we know how bubbly drinks can make sailors burp, right?
Excuse me.
So, are you wondering about the battle between the good and ugly bacteria? Well, there is that wild yeast, nature's good bacteria, on the leaves of the cabbage, as I said. How amazing is that? But air can make unwanted bacteria grow. So that's where the power of sea salt comes in and pushes out the bacteria. Aye, mateys, shall we say thanks to the ocean for our salt?
Aye.
All right, so it's important to finish packing off your kraut, and then your jar lid can be placed on top. All right, Micah, is there going to be a battle between the good and ugly bacteria?
Nope, not as long as you put cabbage.
All right, so then we're good to go, but there's one more ingredient. The last ingredient is thyme. It'll take between a week or 2 weeks, depending on the temperature, to magically cook your cabbage. Start tasting around day 7 and see if it's the crunch you like, or if it's the flavor of sourness that is good for your liking. The more time you give to your magical cooking or fermenting, the softer and sourer your kraut will be. It's time to start watching for those bubbles. And watching. And watching.
All right, everyone. At this point, you can stand up out of your seat and get ready to move a little bit. Today, we're going to be singing a sea shanty, which is what sailors used to pass time when they were working really hard out at sea. Today, we're waiting for our sauerkraut to sour, and while we're doing that, we're going to sing this song. So join us if you will. Use your diaphragm to sing this one, singing big into the room. All right, here we go. We'll be all right. If the wind were in our sails, we'd be all right. If the wind were in our sails, yeah, we'd be all right. If the wind were in our sails, and we'll all hang on behind. And we'll roll our sauerkraut along, we'll roll our sauerkraut along, we'll roll our sauerkraut along, and we'll all hang on behind. All right, this time you join in with us. Yeah, we'd be all right. If the wind were in our sails, we'd be all right. If the wind were in our sails, yeah, we'd be all right. If the wind were in our sails, and we'll all hang on behind. And we roll our sauerkraut along, we'll roll our sauerkraut along, we'll roll our sauerkraut along, and we'll all hang on behind.
Arr! Those sailors sure did make it easy for me. By turning that cabbage into sauerkraut, I can make one of my most favorite tasty treats. But don't worry, it's just me, Chef Zach. And do you know what one of my favorite tasty treats are? Because it's salty, it's sweet, and you could actually put any toppings you want on it. No, it's not the baked potato. It's actually the potato latke. Do you all know anything about the word latke? Because it's actually a Yiddish term. And the Yiddish term means little potato pancake. So these are going to be fried, golden brown. They're almost going to be a little bit like a fritter, and they're really, really tasty. And now the origin of the latke also comes from the Ashkenazi culture. And I'm going to say that one more time. Say it with me. Ashkenazi culture. All right, sailors. Now let's get started making our little potato pancakes. So first things first, we're going to start with our potato. And you really don't have to worry too much about washing this because we're actually going to take the skin off. So what I like to do is simply just peel the potato. And I like to think I'm taking this little potato jacket off so our friend here can have a warm, nice oil bath later and he can get crispity, crunchity, okay? Now when you're peeling, make sure to take your time. This isn't a race and we don't have to go really, really fast. This peeler is a little bit sharp, okay? So just take your time. And then when you get a little bit more comfortable, that's when you can do it just a little bit faster. But make sure safety first. Perfect. And that right there, that's all we're really looking for. There's still a little bit of skin on it, and we're not looking for perfection, but we just want to get most of it off. Great. So now that our potatoes are nice and comfortable, we took off their jackets, let's take a little bit of time and clean off our cutting board. Now we're actually going to get started on assembling our potato pancake. And all we need for that is our grater, okay? And I'm going to use these large holes on this side. Now it is a grater, but I still want you to know that this is a little bit sharp. So really make sure to take your time with this and watch me do it first. So all I do is I simply take my potato, I'll put my grater flat side down, and I like to hold this down with a little bit of pressure. The last thing I want to do is have this kind of rolling around on me, and that makes for an unsafe environment. So I'm going to take my potato to my grater, and I'm just going to start peeling it. So when I get down to this part here, I actually like to put it right in the palm of my hand, press it against, and as you can see, I'm actually holding my fingers away. So my fingers aren't going to come in any contact with this potato. And I'll simply just grate. Oop. And just like this, with this little piece of potato right here, I don't think it's worth it sometimes. And it's okay to stop at a point that you're comfortable at. And for me, I'm comfortable right here. I don't want to cut it anymore because I could risk cutting my finger. So it's okay. Just put the potato down and start on the next one. And now we have our delicious potato. And as you can see, we cut them into small, small strips. So these are gonna fry perfectly, but they're really, really wet. I mean, if I take my hands and I squeeze them, there's a whole lot of moisture in there. And we need to get that moisture out because water and oil do not mix, okay? So let me show you how I go about doing that. All you need is just a little tea towel. This is a towel that I have at home that I'm not really afraid of getting dirty, and quite frankly, I use it for cooking all of the time. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna put my tea towel down, grab my potatoes, and pop them right in the middle. I'm gonna grab, actually let me put this in the middle. And I'm gonna grab each corner and make sure that they touch. Now it's almost like we have our own little potato sack here. And actually, let me get my compost from earlier. And I'm just going to squeeze all of that excess liquid out. And as you can see, there is a lot in there. So you're really gonna need to use your muscles for this one and squeeze and squeeze until you get as much of that liquid out. The more liquid we get out of these, the crispier our potato pancake's gonna get. So if you're making these at home with mom and dad, and you notice that your potato pancakes are really, really wet and they're kind of sticking to the pan, chances are you just have to get a little bit more liquid out. So you might even want mom and dad's help for this because it can be really, really tough to get all of that out. That should be good. Actually, let's clean up our mess here. Chef Zach does not like working with a mess. And you really know that you've done this right when you open up your towel and it still has the shape of a ball, just like that. That's really what you're looking for. And I'm not sure if you can see, but all of this white kind of dry starch, that's actually potato starch. So when you squeeze all of the water out of your potato, all that you have left here is the potato starch. And that is actually what's gonna cause our potatoes to get nice and crispy, okay? So now we can put our potatoes right in our bowl. And now it's time to assemble our little latke cakes. So now we need a binder for our potatoes. And we need something that's gonna act like a glue, but we need a food glue. So one of the things that I like to use is actually the egg. There's enough protein inside the egg yolk to actually hold this together. So when we put our cakes in the pan, they're not gonna fall apart into little tiny pieces and they're gonna hold their shape. Now, if you can't eat eggs, another great substitute is mustard. It has a similar protein to the egg and it's actually gonna keep these binded together. So we're gonna take our one egg and we're gonna crack it right into our potatoes. Perfect. Now we need a little bit of flavoring in here, right? So we're just going to add maybe 2 or 3 pinches, and these are Chef Zach pinches, so these are quite large. 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. And just a little bit of black pepper. It's really, really easy to go overboard with the black pepper. So I like to take just a really small pinch and just sprinkle it right on top. And that's plenty. If you want more, you can always add some later. And last but not least, thanks to our sailors, we have our delicious sauerkraut. So we just took these potato pancakes and we really elevated the flavor by adding this delicious sauerkraut, okay? And just like Joanne said earlier, the sauerkraut is so good for your digestive system and it's really, really healthy for your gut. This is one of my favorite ways to eat sauerkraut because it can be a little tough to eat on its own. It's a really, really strong flavor. So today's food lesson is really about balance. How can we take such a strong flavor like this and make it tasty so we can eat it all winter long? And inside the latke is how I like to do it. So I've got about a cup of sauerkraut from earlier. And if you're a sauerkraut fan, go ahead and add a little bit more. And if you're just dipping your toes into eating sauerkraut, you don't have to use this much either. So use what you're comfortable with. Perfect. Now this is kind of my favorite part of the whole thing because I get to get my hands in there and start moving everything around and squishing it in between my fingers. It feels really, really cool. So I'm just gonna get in there and start mixing my egg and my sauerkraut and my potato. Oh my goodness. This smells so good. That sauerkraut is so strong, but it's strong in a good way. So I think you're really, really gonna like this recipe. And you can see I'm really squeezing it in between my fingers. I want to make sure this is mixed perfectly. Great, so now we're gonna get started making our potato latkes, okay? So first things first, we need to get our pan on about a medium heat, and I'm gonna put in about a half to 3/4 of a cup of canola oil into my pan. This would be considered a little bit of a shallow fry, as opposed to a deep fryer, which we would cook these in gallons of oil. I've got about 1/4 of an inch of oil in my pan. And now when I assemble my latkes, I like to make them into little tiny balls in my hand, and then I'll flatten them out, okay? And now because we put a little bit of that, excuse me, a little bit of that sauerkraut in here, it does have a little bit of moisture. So when you pick up your potato pancake and you can see that they're still pretty wet, that's okay. Go ahead, squeeze a little bit more of that water out, and then we can make our little potato pancakes. So like I said, I'm gonna put it into a little bit of a ball here. And then I'm just gonna flatten them out. Just like that. And they should hold their shape when we put them in the pan. So let me go ahead and get maybe 1 or 2 more so we can cook a few at once. Get some of that liquid out. And right into a little potato pancake. And I'll show you one more. And get creative with this too. These cakes are pretty small. You can make one large one if you want to, or medium-sized ones, or even little baby-sized ones if you want to. So make the size that you want to eat. I think these are going to be the perfect size because I like to pick up my potato pancake like a chip and kind of just eat it just like that. Great. So now we have these assembled, and we have our other mix for later. So you can go ahead and put some plastic wrap over it, or maybe even just that same wet tea towel that we used earlier, and we'll come back and we'll make some more of these later. So now we have our oil. I know what you might be asking yourself, Chef Zach, how am I supposed to know if my oil's hot enough? And that's a really good question. So let's take a look at our oil. So when we look down at our oil, we can see it's really, really shiny and shimmery. That's one indicator. And another indicator I like to use is if I shake my pan just a little bit, you can see how my oil moves just like water. That's how you know your pan is hot and your oil is hot enough to start cooking. With mom and dad's supervision, this is how you're gonna lay your potato pancake down in this oil. What I like to do is grab one of my little potato pancakes and I'm going to lay it in the oil away from me. I always like to lay things in a hot pan away from me, so if I ever splash oil, it goes that way. We never want hot oil to come towards us, we want it to come away from us. So take a look around, make sure no one's standing by you, and go ahead and lay your potato pancake in the hot oil. That's one of my most favorite sounds of all time. It's just that quiet hiss and that little sizzle when food's cooking. Now, I know what you want to do here, and I'm here to tell you to stop. Don't touch these potato pancakes. Let's let them get nice and crispy and golden brown. These potato pancakes aren't gonna get crispy if we're constantly touching them and moving them around and shaking our pan from side to side. We just want them to sit and just do their thing, and they're gonna get some amazing color. So I wanna say maybe about 2 to 3 minutes on each side is gonna get them perfectly golden brown. So let's give them another look. We can see our edges are nice and dark brown. So let's go ahead and flip our cake over, and that looks just wonderful. Perfect. And now you can see how crispy it really gets with all of that potato starch on there. And we really took the time to get all of that water out. So if you notice that your potato pancakes are still sticking to the pan and they're not getting any color, it's okay. Just go back to your mix, grab another tea towel, and squeeze out more water until it's nice and dry. And I can guarantee you they're gonna come out just like this. So now that our potato latkes are done, the next step is to get them out of the pan, okay? So all I'm going to do is grab my little spatula. So we're gonna take our latke and we're gonna bring it right over to our paper towel, because we wanna get all of that excess grease off of our latke, or else it's gonna be eating like the most greasy French fry, and we do not want that to happen at all. We took a lot of time making these, so let's take a little bit of time to get some of that hot oil off and just let it cool for just a moment, okay? So it's really important to put a little bit of salt and pepper once it comes right out of the oil, because that's our last chance to season our latkes. If we do it anywhere after, the salt tends to just roll off and then you'll never get the flavor that you're looking for. So I'm gonna get our last latke out of here. One more time, I'm gonna put it onto our paper towel and let it drain. And you can see these kind of dark circles, that's how much oil was trapped in there. And that is not good eats. So just take a moment and get all of that oil out. And now I know you're supposed to wait maybe 5, maybe 8 minutes for these to cool down, but I'm really hungry now and I wanna show you what we're gonna put on top, okay? So when our latkes are cool, one of the greatest ways to eat these is to put toppings on them, because while they're delicious on their own, they are quite sour from that sauerkraut. And earlier we talked about balancing flavors. So now, how can we take this sour and salty and put some flavors into it that are gonna make it nice and yummy? Well, I'll tell you. Actually, latkes are traditionally eaten with applesauce and sour cream. And I know it may seem a little bit weird, but trust me, the flavor combination works so perfectly. These latkes, though they were fried in fat, could use just a little bit more fat and a little bit more cream to them. And that's where the sour cream comes in. If you don't like sour cream, that's okay. You can use yogurt. I mean, you can even use mayonnaise if that's what you like too, but I'm a fan of the sour cream. So I'm gonna put just a little dollop of sour cream on these. And it looks really, really nice with this little dollop on there. And then I'm going to finish it up with just a little bit of applesauce, because we have that sour, we have our fat, we have our salt. Now let's add a little bit of sweetness to this. And just a little bit on top makes these pancakes taste so delicious. And if you want to take it just one step further, you can always add just a little bit of a garnish on top. And I love to use parsley. It looks so beautiful with just that little sprinkle of green. And to be honest, it's really, really dark and it's really, really gray outside, and it's been snowing every day, so it's actually nice to have something a little bit bright on the plate, and it kind of helps me brighten up my day. So I've showed you how to make potato latkes from start to finish and what I like to put on top. But I want you to get creative. Think about some of the toppings that you love to have and try them out on these potato pancakes. Stay creative, try new things. And if you think the recipe is awesome, send me an email because I'd love to check them out. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for this food, this glorious, glorious food. For the animals and the vegetables and the minerals and the farmers who make it possible.
We have been waiting a whole 10 days to try this sauerkraut, and I'm really excited to taste all the flavors that have been produced.
Crack the top. Let the wild yeasties out. We're going to take out our cabbage leaves. Start with a nibble. Sometimes it's salty, sometimes it's spicy, sometimes it's a little funky. Ready?
Ready? It's good.
Really awesome.
It's still got that crunch.
And the ginger, good.
It's gonna be great on top of some other foods too.
Success. We're gonna make a toast to the soil microbiome
To the gut microbiome.
and to nourishing our communities.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.